I'm Victoria, 48, female, and at my stepson's college graduation. After I had paid for his tuition, his car, and his apartment for 4 solid years, he stood on a stage and thanked everyone for his success except for me. Then, with a smirk, he handed me the dinner bill for 42 people. The price of my freedom, it turned out, was the cost of a catered party I refused to attend. The weight of that thick linen blend paper in my hand felt heavier than any architectural blueprint I had ever held. It represented a structure I had painstakingly tried to build over the last decade, a family. And in one cruel, calculated moment, my stepson, Leo, had demolished it. My partner, David, stood beside me, his hand a warm, steady presence on the small of my back, the only anchor in a sea of stunned faces. I looked from the outrageous number at the bottom of the bill to Leo's smug face, and I knew, with a clarity that cut through years of self-deception, that this was not a home I could renovate. It was a condemned building, and it was time to walk away. My relationship with Leo was never a fairy tale of blended families. I met his father, Robert, when Leo was a quiet, observant 12-year-old. Robert was charming, a successful real estate agent who could sell you on a dream, and for a while, I bought into the dream he sold me. A happy, complete family. We married a year later, and I stepped into the role of stepmother with earnest intention. I am an architect. I believe in strong foundations, in careful planning, in creating spaces where people feel safe and valued. I tried to apply those same principles to our family. But Robert's foundation was built on shifting sand. He was a man who valued appearances above all else. He loved the idea of providing for his son, but when it came to the actual, unglamorous work of it, he was conveniently absent. The financial and emotional labor fell to me. At first, it was subtle. I became the designated homework helper, the emergency contact at school, the one who remembered to schedule dentist appointments. Robert would praise my involvement, calling me the glue that held everything together. It felt good at the time to be needed. I didn't realize that glue is meant to be used, then forgotten once it dries. The first crack in my carefully constructed facade appeared on Leo's 16th birthday. I had spent weeks listening to him talk about wanting a professional-grade drafting table. He had shown an interest in my work, and my heart swelled with the possibility of sharing my passion with him. I found the perfect one, a beautiful, solid oak table with all the proper tools and a high-end lamp. It was expensive, but I saw it as an investment in his future, a bridge between us. I assembled it myself in his room while he was at school, a surprise for when he got home. That evening, Leo saw the table and his eyes lit up. "Wow, Victoria, this is incredible," he said, running his hand over the smooth wood. For a moment, I felt a pure, unadulterated joy. Then Robert walked in, beaming. "Happy birthday, son," he boomed, dangling a set of car keys. "It's a brand new Mustang, base model, but we can get it customized." Leo's attention snapped away from the drafting table so fast it was like it had vanished. The car, of course, a flashy, exciting gift that completely overshadowed my thoughtful, practical one. I watched from the doorway as Robert and Leo bounded outside, their laughter echoing back into the quiet house. Later that night, Robert draped an arm around me. He loved the car, didn't he? It's important for a boy his age to have some status. He gestured vaguely toward Leo's room. "That table thing is great, honey." "Really practical." Practical, the word landed like a stone in my gut. My gift was practical, his was status. The drafting table was used a handful of times before it became a glorified shelf for video game cases and clothes. The car, which I ended up making most of the insurance payments on, became his entire personality. It wasn't just that Robert had one-upped me. It was that he had, with his single, flashy gesture, taught Leo what to value. And it wasn't the quiet, steady support I represented. Another time, a couple of years later, I received a call from a panicked Leo. He was a freshman in college, living in an apartment near campus, an apartment I co-signed for and whose rent I paid directly every month. He had forgotten about a series of expensive parking tickets on the Mustang, and now there was a boot on the wheel. He was terrified to tell his father. "Dad will flip out," he whispered into the phone. "He'll say I'm irresponsible. Can you just..." "Handle it, Victoria, please. I'll pay you back, I swear." I sighed, transferred the nearly $800 from my savings account, and spent the next hour on the phone with the municipal court to clear the fines. When I mentioned it to Robert that evening, hoping we could present a united front and talk to Leo about responsibility, he just waved a dismissive hand. "Kids will be kids," he said, scrolling through listings on his tablet. "That's why you're there, Vic, to handle the small stuff. You're so good at it." He framed it as a compliment, but it felt like a job description. I was the chief operating officer of the family's small stuff, while he remained the flashy, fun CEO who swooped in for the big announcements and birthday parties. I never saw a dime of that $800 back. When I gently reminded Leo about it a month later, he mumbled something about his dad telling him not to worry, that I had it covered. Robert had not only outsourced the problem to me, but had also absolved Leo of any responsibility for it. The dynamic only worsened after Robert and I divorced. The separation was amicable on the surface, but the underlying reason was that I was tired of being the only adult in our marriage. He moved on quickly, finding a new partner, Tiffany. She was a luxury car saleswoman, all sharp angles, bright lipstick, and the scent of expensive perfume. She was the human embodiment of the Mustang he had bought Leo. I, in my practical blouses and sensible shoes, felt like the drafting table. Leo became utterly infatuated with Tiffany and the lifestyle she and Robert projected. They went on lavish vacations, posting perfectly curated photos on social media. They attended galas and exclusive events. Meanwhile, I was writing checks for Leo's tuition, his groceries, his textbooks. My support was invisible, a silent transaction that happened behind the scenes. Their support was loud, shiny, and photogenic. I remember one excruciating holiday dinner. Leo, home from his junior year, couldn't stop talking about Tiffany. "Tiffany just sold a custom Rolls-Royce to some tech billionaire," he announced to the table. "She said the commission alone was more than most people make in a year. She's a killer." He then turned to me. "So, Victoria, still designing libraries and community centers?" The question wasn't innocent. It was loaded, a thinly veiled comparison between my steady, meaningful work and Tiffany's high-stakes glamour. "Yes, Leo," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "I'm currently leading the project for the new downtown public library. It's going to have a wing dedicated to adult literacy programs." "Oh, that's nice," he said, his attention already drifting back to his phone, probably to see if Tiffany had posted anything new. Robert just smiled, a proud, fatherly expression on his face that wasn't directed at me. He was proud of the son who was learning to worship the right things: money, flash, and status. In that moment, I wasn't just a stepmother. I was a relic from a past life he had happily discarded, a financial obligation he had successfully transferred. My partner, David, a history teacher who valued substance over style, squeezed my hand under the table. He saw it all. He saw me. But I wasn't ready to see it myself. I still held out hope that my investment, 4 years of tuition, a car, an apartment, and countless moments of small stuff, would yield a dividend of love and respect. I thought graduation day would be the day I was finally seen. I could not have been more wrong. The final semester of Leo's college career was a marathon of expenses and excuses. It felt as though every week brought a new line item, a new reason for me to open my wallet. There was the fee for his cap and gown, the cost of graduation announcements, which I noticed, with a small pang, listed only Robert and his mother as the proud parents, and the deposit for the celebratory dinner he was planning. "It's going to be huge, Victoria," he'd said over the phone, his voice buzzing with an excitement he rarely showed in our conversations. "We've got all of Dad's side of the family coming, plus a bunch of my friends and their parents. Tiffany knows the owner of this amazing steakhouse downtown, the Gilded Cut. She's getting us the private room." "That sounds elaborate," I said, picturing the bill. "How many people are we talking about?" "I don't know, like 40, maybe more," he said breezily. "Don't worry about it, it's a celebration." The "don't worry about it" was a classic Leoism, inherited directly from his father. It was code for Victoria will handle the financial fallout. I made a mental note and paid the $500 deposit over the phone, the hostess on the other end confirming the reservation for the Robert family party. My own contribution to his actual academic success was far more hands-on. Leo's final thesis for his communications degree was a sprawling, unfocused mess. He called me in a panic 2 weeks before it was due. "I'm going to fail, Victoria, I swear. I can't make sense of any of this," he moaned. I spent the next 3 nights on video calls with him, well past midnight. I didn't write it for him, but I did what an architect does. I helped him the structure. I drew mind maps, helped him outline his arguments, and edited his drafts for clarity and flow. I taught him how to build a coherent argument from the ground up, how to lay a foundation of research and build upon it. He was receptive, even grateful, during those late-night sessions. "Thanks, Victoria. You're a lifesaver," he said as we logged off the final call, the paper finally in a respectable state. I don't know what I would have done. That small acknowledgement was a flicker of warmth in the growing cold. It was enough to reignite my hope. This is what mattered, I told myself, not the flashy dinners or the luxury cars. This was the real support, the kind that lasts. He sees it. He must. During this time, David watched me with a gentle, worried expression. One evening, he found me at my desk, cross-referencing Leo's tuition statement with my bank records. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "You know, you've more than fulfilled any obligation you ever had to him, Victoria," he said softly. "You've given him a debt-free start to life. That's more than most kids get from their actual parents." "It's his graduation, David," I replied, not looking up from the screen. "It's the finish line. I just want to see him across it." "And what happens after that?" he pressed, his tone careful. "Does the Bank of Victoria close its doors, or will there be a down payment for a condo, a new car to replace the old one?" I bristled. "He's a good kid. He's just been influenced by his father." "His father is a grown man, and so is Leo," David said, walking over and placing a hand on my shoulder. "At some point, you have to stop blaming Robert for Leo's choices. Leo is 22. He's making his own decisions about who to respect and who to use." I knew he was right, but admitting it felt like admitting my entire 10-year investment had been a failure. It was easier to believe that Leo was just young and impressionable, that once he was out in the real world, away from the glitz of Robert and Tiffany, he would realize the value of my steady, unwavering support. "He's just excited," I said, more to convince myself than David. "This is a big moment for him. He'll come around." David didn't argue. He just squeezed my shoulder and said, "I hope you're right." The week of the graduation, the red flags began to wave more frantically. Leo sent me a link to a gift registry for his graduation. It was filled with high-end electronics, designer luggage, and a subscription to a luxury car of the month club. I stared at the screen, baffled. I had just paid the final $15,000 installment of his tuition. I had bought him the car he drove. I paid the rent on the apartment he slept in. Wasn't that the gift? When I called him, he was defensive. "It wasn't for you, Victoria. It was for, other family, Dad's friends and stuff. Tiffany said it was a good idea to give people options." Tiffany said. The phrase was becoming a painful refrain. Tiffany, the oracle of modern etiquette and high-class living, had sanctioned this blatant cash grab. I closed the registry page without buying a thing. My gift, I reasoned, was his entire education. The day before we were set to drive down for the ceremony, I was picking up my suit from the dry cleaner when my phone buzzed. It was a social media notification. Tiffany had tagged me in a photo. My stomach clenched. I rarely used the platform, but I tapped the notification out of a grim sense of curiosity. The photo was of Leo, Robert, and Tiffany standing in front of the campus bell tower. Leo had his arms around his father and Tiffany, a wide, gleaming smile on his face. He was wearing a new, impeccably tailored suit. The caption, written by Tiffany, read, "So proud of our boy. Last day as a student, first day of the rest of his amazing life. We are so thrilled to celebrate all your hard work, Leo. You earned this. Red. Our boy, we are so thrilled. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't mentioned. I was an hour away, running errands in preparation to come celebrate him, and they were already there, a perfect, happy family, writing me out of the narrative before the main event had even begun. I paid for the dry cleaning, my hands trembling slightly. David found me in the car, staring at the phone, my face pale. He didn't have to ask what was wrong. He just took the phone from my hand, put it in the glove compartment, and started the engine. "Let's go home," he said gently. The drive was silent, but in that silence, a small, hard seed of resolution began to form in my heart. I was going to see this through, but I was done pretending. Graduation day dawned bright and oppressively cheerful. The sun beat down on the sprawling university lawn, where thousands of folding chairs were arranged in neat, hopeful rows. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and perfume, a cacophony of proud laughter and camera clicks. I felt a strange sense-of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. I wore my best suit, a tailored navy blue ensemble that usually made me feel powerful and put together. Today, it felt like a costume. David and I found our seats, which were marked with little reserved signs. Robert had arranged the tickets, and it showed. He, Tiffany, and Leo's grandparents were in the front row of the family section. David and I were 3 rows back, tucked behind a pillar that partially obscured the view of the stage. Tiffany, in a canary yellow dress that was impossible to miss, turned and gave us a tight, brilliant smile. "Victoria, David, so glad you could make it," she called out, her voice carrying over the heads of the people between us. It was a performance for the benefit of those around her, a demonstration of her magnanimity. I gave a weak smile and a small wave in return. Robert looked over, giving a curt nod. He was in his element, playing the role of the proud patriarch. He leaned over to whisper something in Leo's ear, who was sitting in the front row of the graduates, and they both shared a laugh. Leo's eyes flickered past me, not a glimmer of recognition in them. He looked right through me as if I were a pane of glass. I smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on my pants. "Subtle," David murmured beside me, his voice low and for my ears only. "It's fine," I whispered back, my voice brittle. "I'm just here to see him get his diploma." But it wasn't fine. It felt like a deliberate, public demotion. For years, I was in the front row of his life, at parent-teacher conferences, school plays, and every single tuition payment portal. Today, on the day that was supposed to be the culmination of all that effort, I was relegated to the cheap seats. The ceremony dragged on, a blur of speeches from deans and honored alumni. I clapped when I was supposed to, my movements mechanical. I tried to feel pride. I tried to summon the maternal warmth I thought I was supposed to feel. I had helped build this moment. The foundation of this achievement was poured from my bank account, framed with my late-night support. Yet watching him out there, I felt no connection. I was merely the contractor, observing the building's ribbon cutting from across the street. Finally, the moment came for the student speaker. It was Leo. I hadn't known he'd been chosen. A part of me, a foolish, stubborn part, flickered with hope. This was his chance. On a public stage, in front of everyone, he would have to acknowledge the truth. He couldn't possibly ignore my contribution now. Leo walked to the podium with an easy confidence, the new suit looking sharp under the stage lights. He smiled out at the crowd, a practiced, charming smile he'd learned from his father. "Wow," he began, "we did it." The crowd cheered. He launched into a speech about the future, about following dreams, the usual platitudes. It was well delivered, I had to admit. He was a natural performer. Then, he shifted his tone, getting to the personal thank yous. "I couldn't have done this alone, of course," he said, his voice thick with emotion that sounded almost genuine. "There are a few people who were the bedrock of my success, the ones who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. "First, to my mom," he said. "Even though she's no longer with us, I know she's watching, and her spirit gave me strength every single day." It was a beautiful, heartfelt tribute to his late mother, and I felt a pang of sympathy. This was always a difficult subject. And to my dad, he continued, turning his gaze toward the front row. Dad, you are my hero. You taught me what it means to be a man, to strive for success, and to never settle for less than you deserve. Your generosity and guidance have been my North Star. Robert puffed out his chest, placing a hand over his heart in a dramatic gesture. The two of them locked eyes in a moment of profound, shared understanding. I felt a familiar pang of being on the outside of their exclusive club. And, Leo's voice cracked slightly, I have to thank someone who came into my life more recently, but who has had a bigger impact than she will ever know. He paused, and his eyes scanned the front row until they landed directly on Tiffany. He smiled, a wide, adoring smile. Tiffany, he said, his voice now clear and strong. Thank you. You showed me what it looks like to be truly passionate about your life, to build something incredible from scratch. Your support, your belief in me, it's meant the world. You've become like a second mother to me. The words hit me with physical force. Like a second mother. Tiffany, who had been in his life for 2 years, whose most significant contribution was recommending a steakhouse and creating a gift registry, was being coronated. The camera for the live stream zoomed in on Tiffany's face as she dabbed a tear from the corner of her eye, a perfect picture of lovin'. Maternal pride. I sat frozen, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. He wasn't going to say my name. The realization wasn't a slow dawn, it was a lightning strike, illuminating the entire landscape of our relationship in one brutal flash. All the years, the checks, the late-night calls, the worry, the effort, it had all been erased. I had not been demoted, I had been deleted from history. I felt David's hand find mine. His grip was firm, grounding. I looked at the stage, at this young man I had helped raise, and I felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. He finished his speech to thunderous applause. I brought my hands together, the polite, soft claps entirely automatic. My mind was somewhere else, replaying his words, searching for some mistake, some misunderstanding. But there was none. The omission was as deliberate and precise as a surgeon's cut. It was meant to wound, and it had. He had stood before hundreds of people and publicly declared that I was not his family, that I was nothing. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed into a chaotic, joyous swarm on the lawn. Graduates in black robes searched for their families, caps were thrown in the air, and laughter mixed with the sound of popping champagne corks. It felt like a party on another planet. David and I stood near the edge of the crowd, by the pillar that had been my companion for the last 2 hours. I felt strangely calm, the fiery hurt having cooled into a hard, dense certainty in the pit of my stomach. Soon, the group approached us. It was a procession, led by Robert and a beaming Leo. Tiffany was attached to Robert's arm, her yellow dress a beacon of triumph. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely knew trailed behind them, all talking at once. "There you are," Robert boomed, as if he had been searching for us. "Great speech, wasn't it? My son, a real orator." "It was very moving," David said, his voice perfectly neutral. An aunt I couldn't name patted my arm. "You must be so proud, Victoria, all that hard work paying off." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Before I could formulate a reply, Leo was standing in front of me. He had taken off his cap, and his hair was damp with sweat. There was a feverish, arrogant energy coming off him. The success, the public adoration, had made him bold. "Hey, Victoria," he said, his tone casual, almost bored. "Thanks for coming." It was the most dismissive acknowledgement imaginable, a crumb thrown to a beggar. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. I didn't offer congratulations. I didn't smile. I just waited. He seemed momentarily thrown off by my silence. A flicker of something, annoyance, uncertainty, crossed his face before it was replaced by a familiar smirk. It was a condescending, entitled expression I had seen 1,000 times, usually right before he was about to ask for something. "So," he said, reaching into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, "we're all heading over to the Gilded Cut now. The reservation is for 6 o'clock. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the bill from the restaurant, pre-printed for the party of 42. He held it out to me. "Here," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire family entourage to hear. "Figured you could take care of this before you head out." He didn't ask, he commanded. It was a statement of fact, an assumption of my role so deeply ingrained that he didn't even feel the need to couch it in a polite question. He was handing me the bill in front of everyone, not just as a matter of logistics, but as a display of power. He was reinforcing the hierarchy he had just established in his speech. Robert and Tiffany were there for the glory. I was there to handle the check. I took the bill from his hand. The paper was crisp and heavy. My eyes scanned the page, past the itemized list of dozens of steaks, lobster tails, and countless bottles of wine I hadn't ordered, and landed on the total at the bottom. The number was staggering. It was more than a semester's worth of his rent. Including the pre-calculated 20% gratuity for a large party, the sum was well over $7,000. A quiet hush fell over the family members nearby. They were all watching, waiting to see what I would do. This was the final act of the play. I was supposed to nod, slip the bill into my purse, and assure everyone it was taken care of. That was my part. I lifted my eyes from the bill and looked directly at Leo. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch. I saw the smirk on his face begin to waver, replaced by a sliver of confusion. He expected gratitude. He expected me to be happy to pay for the honor of being in his presence. But I was no longer the woman who had assembled a drafting table in his room, hoping for a crumb of connection. I was no longer the woman who would quietly pay off his debts to keep the peace. The woman he knew, the compliant, ever-providing stepmother, had been publicly executed during his spee. A new woman was standing in her place. Without breaking eye contact with him, I turned slightly. About 10 feet away, there was a large, black municipal trash can, overflowing with discarded programs and water bottles. Slowly and deliberately, I walked towards it. Every head turned to follow me. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. I could feel Robert's glare on my back, could sense Tiffany's smugness curdling into disbelief. I reached the trash can. I held the bill over the opening for a single, theatrical second. I glanced back at Leo one last time. His mouth was slightly agape, the confident smirk completely gone, replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending shock. Then I let it go. The paper fluttered for a moment, before landing softly on a pile of crushed plastic. I turned back to the stunned group. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. My action was the entire speech I had been holding back for a decade. It was my resignation, my declaration of independence, my final, closing argument. David was by my side in an instant. He placed his hand on my back again, a gesture of solidarity and support. "Ready to go?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. And together, we turned and walked away. We walked past Leo, who was still frozen, staring at the trash can. We walked past Robert, whose face was a mask of thunderous rage. We walked past Tiffany, whose perfectly applied lipstick was now framing a slack-jawed expression of astonishment. We walked away from the entire party of 42, away from the life I had tried so hard to build, and toward the car, toward silence, toward freedom. The sound of Robert shouting my name behind me was just noise, the fading soundtrack to a movie that was finally over. The walk to the car was the longest and shortest walk of my life. Each step felt both impossibly heavy and wonderfully light. The furious shouts of my ex-husband, "Victoria, Victoria, you get back here right now," faded behind us, swallowed by the general din of the campus. I didn't turn back. Turning back was what I had always done, and I was finished with it. We got into David's sensible sedan, a world away from the flashy cars Robert and Tiffany favored. I sank into the passenger seat, the calm I'd felt earlier still holding, a solid core inside me. David started the car, the air conditioning blasting a welcome stream of cool air into the suddenly silent space. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He just drove, letting the silence be whatever I needed it to be. We were barely off campus when my phone, which I'd left in the car, began to buzz violently in the center console. The screen lit up with Robert's face. I watched it buzz, the vibrations rattling against the plastic. It buzzed for a full 30 seconds before stopping, and then, almost immediately, it started again. "Let it go," I said, my voice hoarse. David nodded, his eyes on the road. The call ended, and a second later, a text notification appeared on the lock screen, then another, and another. The phone was having a seizure, a relentless barrage of incoming messages. Curiosity, like a morbid magnetic pull, was too strong to resist. I picked up the phone. It was like opening a floodgate. From Robert. "How dare you? You embarrassed me. You embarrassed my entire family. After everything I did for you, letting you be a part of my son's life. This is how you repay me. You are the most selfish, vindictive woman I have ever known. Pick up your phone, now." Then, the messages from Leo started. "WTF, Victoria? Are you serious? You just threw the bill in the trash, in front of everyone. My graduation is ruined. You ruined it. I can't believe you. You were supposed to pay for it. You always pay. You owe me. You owe Emmy for everything." The words "you owe me" were what broke the dam. The sheer, unmitigated gall of that statement. I had poured a fortune, an amount of money that would be life-changing for most people, into this young man's future. I had given him my time, my energy, my heart, and he, in his magnificent entitlement, believed that I was the one in his debt. A sound escaped my lips. It started as a choked gasp and turned into something else entirely: laughter. It was a wild, unhinged, liberating sound. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated release. I was laughing at the absurdity of it all, laughing at myself for not seeing it sooner. Laughing at the 10 years I had spent trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. David glanced over, a slow smile spreading across his face as he realized what was happening. "Feeling better?" he asked. "So much better," I gasped between fits of laughter. "Oh, David," he said, "I owe him." I opened Leo's contact information. His profile picture was the one Tiffany had posted yesterday, the one of him with her and his father. The happy family. My finger Hav. Aired over the block this caller button. For a decade, I had been afraid of this moment, of severing the connection, of being the one to cause a rift. Now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I pressed the button. A small pop-up asked for confirmation. "Are you sure you want to block this contact?" I pressed block contact with a decisive tap. Then I did the same for Robert. And for his sister, who had just sent a message that began with, "I don't know what your problem is, but..." I blocked them all. One by one, I bricked up the doorways they had used to walk in and out of my life as they pleased. With each tap, I felt a knot in my chest loosen. When I was done, I placed the phone face down in the console. The silence that filled the car this time was different. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It was mine. "So," David said, breaking the quiet, "what do you want to do now?" "I want to go home," I said. "And I want to open that ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne we were saving for a special occasion." "What are we celebrating?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye. I looked out the window at the landscape flying by, at the ordinary world that suddenly looked brand new. "My graduation," I said, "from a life that no longer fits." When we got home, I changed out of my power suit and into my most comfortable clothes. David popped the champagne, and the sound echoed the feeling in my heart, a release of pressure. We sat on our back deck, the evening air warm and pleasant. We didn't talk about Leo or Robert or the disastrous graduation. We talked about the garden David wanted to plant. We talked about a trip to Spain I had always wanted to take, to see Gaudi's architecture in person. We talked about our future, a future that was suddenly so much lighter and less complicated. Later that night, curled up in bed, I felt a single, final pang. It wasn't for Leo or the family I thought I was building. It was a pang of grief for the woman I used to be, the one who tried so hard and for so long to earn a love that was never on offer. I mourned her naivete, her stubborn hope. But as I drifted off to sleep, with David's steady breathing beside me, I knew that she had to be left behind so that I could finally move forward. The demolition was complete. It was time to start designing my new life. In the days that followed, the silence from my phone was a blessing, but the world has other ways of reaching you. The fallout came not as a direct assault, but as a series of flanking maneuvers from people I barely knew. Robert's extended family, the flying monkeys dispatched to deliver his message of outrage. The first was a call from a cousin named Carol, a woman I'd met maybe 5 times. I answered out of a residual politeness I was still trying to shed. "Victoria, honey," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm just calling to see if you're all right. We were all so worried when you and your friend rushed off like that. Robert is beside himself. He's just devastated by how you behaved." I took a deep breath. The old Victoria would have apologized, would have tried to explain herself, to justify her actions. The new Victoria had no interest in defending her own boundaries to a woman who was acting as a mouthpiece for her manipulative ex-husband. "I'm perfectly fine, Carol," I said, my voice cool and even. "Thank you for your concern." "Well, it's just that Leo is heartbroken," she continued, undeterred. "You completely humiliated that poor boy on what should have been the happiest day of his life. And over what? A dinner bill? You know Robert would have paid you back if you'd asked." The lie was so blatant, so utterly contrary to a decade of experience, that I almost laughed again. Robert had never once, in all the years I knew him, paid me back for anything related to Leo. "Carol," I said, my patience gone, "I am not going to discuss this with you. What happened between Leo and me is our business. If Robert is devastated, it's because he and Tiffany are likely the ones who had to scramble to pay that $7,000 bill. My involvement in that family is over. Please don't call me again." I hung up before she could respond. It felt incredible. It was a muscle I hadn't used in years, the ability to simply end a conversation that was not serving me. A few days later, an email arrived from Robert's mother. It was long and rambling, a masterclass in guilt and revisionist history. It painted me as a cold, calculating woman who had been waiting for an opportunity to hurt her loving, generous son and her perfect grandson. It talked about family loyalty and the sacrifices Robert had made. The final line was the crescendo. "I hope you find it in your heart to apologize to Leo and make this right. He deserved to be celebrated, not shamed by your jealousy of Tiffany." Jealousy? They had decided that was my motive. It was easier for them to believe I was a scorned, jealous woman than to accept the simple truth. I was a tired, disrespected woman who had finally reached her limit. I read the email, dragged it to the trash folder, and then emptied the trash. Deleting it felt like cleaning a wound. Amidst the fallout, David was my rock. He never once questioned my decision. He just listened when I needed to vent, made me tea, and reminded me to look forward, not back. One evening, I was sitting at my drafting table, not working on a client's project, but sketching ideas for a small studio in our backyard. A place just for me. I found myself thinking about the money, the sheer volume of it. I pulled out old bank statements, a morbid curiosity guiding my hands. I started a spreadsheet: 4 years of tuition, 48 months of rent, the down payment and insurance on the Mustang, the textbooks, the fees, the plane tickets for his spring break trips, the emergency bailouts. As I tallied the numbers, my breath caught in my throat. The total was well into the 6 figures. It was enough to have paid off my own mortgage. It was enough for a world cruise. It was a staggering sum of money that I had given away with nothing but hope in return. Seeing the number in black and white wasn't painful, as I expected it to be. It was clarifying. This was not an investment that had failed to mature. This was the price I had paid for a decade-long lesson. It was the cost of my own education. And the final $7,000 dinner bill wasn't the final insult. It was the final exam, and by dropping it in the trash, I had passed with flying colors. "What are you doing?" David asked, coming up behind me and looking at the spreadsheet on my screen. "Calculating the price of my freedom," I said, a wry smile on my lips. He looked at the final tally and whistled softly. That's one expensive education. The most valuable one I've ever had, I replied. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to look at it anymore. The number didn't matter. What mattered was that the payments had stopped. The final loose end was a joint savings account Robert and I had kept open after the divorce, a forgotten relic with a few $1,000s in it that we'd earmarked for Leo's future needs. It was technically my money, left over from my own savings, but we'd never closed it. The next morning, I went to the bank. I closed the account and had the cashier make out a certified check. But instead of depositing it into my own account, I walked to the downtown public library, the one I had designed a few years prior. I found the director of the adult literacy wing, the program Leo had so casually dismissed as nice. I endorsed the check and handed it to her as an anonymous donation. "This will fund our tutoring program for the next 6 months," she said, her eyes wide with gratitude. I don't know what to say, thank you." "No," I said, feeling a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. "Thank you." Walking out of the library, a building with my architectural signature on it, a place of substance and quiet community, I felt the last bit of Robert and Leo's world fall away. I had taken the last vestige of my financial support for them and planted it somewhere it could actually grow. It was a final, quiet act of defiance, a way of transforming the cost of my past into an investment in someone else's future. I was no longer a benefactor to the ungrateful. I was free. 3 months passed. The angry calls and messages had long since ceased. The silence was no longer a novelty. It was the new, peaceful normal. Summer settled over the city, warm and golden. The world that had seemed so gray and transactional was slowly regaining its color. David and I took that trip to Spain. We wandered through the whimsical, brilliant streets of Barcelona, marveling at the genius of Gaudí. Standing in the Sagrada Familia, looking up at the canopy of stone columns that branched out like trees in a forest, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what architecture was supposed to be: inspiring, uplifting, built to last for generations. It was everything my constructed family with Robert and Leo was not. It was real. One afternoon, sitting at a small cafe, I received a message from an old, mutual friend of Robert's and mine. It was a hesitant, carefully worded text. "Hey Victoria, hope you're well. Not trying to stir up trouble, but I thought you might want to know. Heard through the grapevine that Leo is working 2 jobs now. One as a barista and one doing night stocking at a grocery store. Apparently, Robert refused to pay the graduation dinner bill and Tiffany wasn't having it. Told Leo he was a grown man and needed to handle his own responsibilities. He's apparently trying to pay the restaurant back in installments." I read the message twice. There was no surge of vengeful glee, no satisfying "I told you so" moment. There was only a quiet, sad sense of inevitability. Leo was finally learning the lesson I had tried, and led to teach him for years. Responsibility wasn't a punishment. It was simply the consequence of one's own actions. He had ordered the lavish party. Now he was paying for it, one latte and one stocked shelf at a time. The Bank of Victoria was permanently closed, and he was discovering that the interest rates at the bank of real life were brutally high. I typed back a simple reply: "Thank you for letting me know. I wish him the best." And I meant it. I no longer had the energy for anger or resentment. His life was his own to live, and my only wish was for it to be lived far away from mine. When I returned home, tanned and rested, I threw myself into my work and my life with a renewed passion. The plans for the small studio in our backyard became a real project. David and I spent our weekends digging the foundation and framing the walls. We worked as a team, our movements easy and synchronized. He wasn't a flashy man, but his love was like the structures I designed: solid, dependable, and built to last. His support wasn't a grand gesture. It was in the steady way he held a ladder, the coffee he brought me without asking, the quiet understanding in his eyes. One Saturday, as we were putting up drywall, I paused and looked at the skeleton of the building. It was small, but it was ours. We were building it together. A real partnership. What are you thinking about? David asked, wiping a smudge of dust from his nose. About foundations, I said, and how important it is to build on solid ground. He smiled, understanding exactly what I meant. He came over and wrapped his arms around me, his embrace strong and sure. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and the promise of a future we were creating with our own hands, I felt truly at peace. I had lost a stepson, but I had gained my self-respect. I had walked away from a family, but I had walked toward a partnership. The cost of the lesson was high, but the freedom it purchased was priceless. I am an architect. I know that sometimes, the most important part of building something new and beautiful is having the courage to first demolish what is rotten and unstable. My life is my own grand design now, and for the first time in a very long time, I love the blueprints. So, I leave you with this question. Was I wrong to walk away? Was my action at the graduation a moment of petty revenge, or was it a long overdue act of self-preservation? What do you do when you realize the people you've been supporting see you not as a person, but as a resource? I'm genuinely curious to hear what you would have done in my shoes.